My name is Madison Blake. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how my family faked my father's death, tried to steal $8 million meant for me, and how I turned their perfect con into their ultimate downfall. It started with a phone call at 3:12 a.m. I jolted awake in my cramped Notting Hill apartment, heart racing as the shrill ringtone cut through the silence. The screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in months. Savannah. My sister. She never called me at this hour. Never called me at all anymore. Madison, her voice cracked on the other end, muffled with panic. It's Dad. He had a heart attack. I sat up straight, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. What? Where? Is he? Is he alive? They rushed him to St. Luke's in Manhattan. The doctor said it's serious. Before he passed out. He asked for you. Everything after that was a blur. Throwing clothes into a suitcase, fumbling through my laptop to book the next flight to New York. Economy was gone. I bought a one-way business class ticket that drained nearly every cent I'd saved the past 2 years in London. I was days away from debuting my spring collection at Fashion Week. Years of clawing my way up, working in silence while others whispered I'd never make it, all now hanging in the balance because of one call. But it was Dad. The man who once held my hand as I sobbed over my first runway rejection. Who used to say things like, fashion's a hobby, not a career, yet still kept every article I was ever featured in. If this was his last breath, he wanted me there. Had to go. By the time I landed at JFK 8 hours later, it was still dark. I turned on my phone. No updates, no missed calls, just a short message from Savannah. Are you here yet? Eric's at the gate. Eric, my cousin. The one who once threatened to punch Dad in a business meeting over a failed investment. Why him? Outside baggage claim, Eric was waiting in a black SUV. He looked calm. How come? How's Dad? I asked the second I reached him. There's something you should know, he said, glancing away. A chill crept down my spine. What do you mean? Where is he? Let's talk in the car, he muttered. Mom wants you to come home and rest first. Stop. No. I want to go to the hospital. Right now. He hesitated, then forced a smile. Madison, just stay calm. It was a scare, not. I didn't let him finish. I pushed past him and got in the car, my stomach twisting the entire ride. The streets of Manhattan were still asleep, but inside that car, something buzzed beneath the surface. Unspoken, dark, calculated. When we finally pulled into St. Luke's, I didn't wait for Eric to park. I jumped out, ran inside, and approached the front desk. Douglas Blake, I said breathlessly. He was brought in with a heart attack. I'm his daughter. The nurse blinked. Can you repeat that? Douglas Blake. My father. Around 1 a.m. last night. Type. Time slowed. Then she looked up with a tight smile. I'm sorry. There's no one by that name in our system. Not last night. Not in the past 48 hours. I stared at her, dumbfounded. What? She shook her head. No Douglas Blake was admitted here. Turned slowly. Eric stood a few feet behind me, shifting nervously. Eric, I said through clenched teeth. Where? Father. He stepped forward, hands raised as if trying to calm a wild animal. Look, it wasn't really a heart attack. He's fine. We just needed you home. My heart nearly stopped. You lied. He flinched. We all did. Savannah mommed me. It was the only way. There are things you need to know. I walked past him, out of the hospital, down the sidewalk as my entire chest burned with rage. They used my fear, my love, to drag me here under false pretenses. I had walked away from my career, risked everything, and they'd baited me like I was a pawn. And I knew one thing for certain. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't good. Back at the house, my childhood home looked frozen in time. The porch still creaked. The door still stuck. Inside, the scent of lavender and lemon cleaner lingered. My mother appeared at the end of the foyer, wrapped in a silk robe like we were preparing for Christmas dinner, not recovering from a life-or-death emergency. You're finally home, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone's in the dining room. I stood frozen, the chill of betrayal crawling down my back. When I stepped into the dining room, I knew immediately this wasn't about family. The table was set like a stage. Embroidered cloth, crystal glasses, almond waffles. My childhood favorite. Everything was fake. Performed. And at the head of the table sat my father. Not hooked to IVs or recovering in a hospital, but sipping hot tea, completely fine. "Dad," said stunned. "You look alive," he quipped, setting down his cup. "I am." I didn't sit. I didn't speak. Waited. He leaned forward. "We need you, Madison. There's something, an opportunity." My mother chimed in. "Your 30th birthday is next month. You'll receive the inheritance. Calvin Blake left it to you, didn't he?" I narrowed my eyes. 8.3 million. Including the Vermont estate. Silence. "You knew?" my mother asked. "Of course I did," I said coldly. "Grandpa told me everything before he died. And he gave it to me with one condition. I stay out of the family business." My father's face turned to stone. "A ridiculous condition." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "It was the only way he could protect me from this. From them." Eric jumped in, voice rising. "You can't just watch us drown, Madison. That money was built from our blood and sweat. Or from fake permits and shady loans." Snap. My father stood. "If you walk away, the consequences." "I've already lost enough," I said. "But now I play by my rules." I turned and walked out. Back upstairs, I pulled out an old letter Grandpa Calvin had left me. His handwriting still steady. His message clear. Blood isn't a chain. Integrity is. I sat on the edge of the bed, everything inside me hollowed and hot all at once. They brought me here to manipulate me. To force me to surrender something that wasn't theirs. And now that I knew how far they'd go, faking a death, lying, staging emotion, I knew I had to be ready for more. Because they weren't done. And neither was I. The morning after the staged breakfast, I woke up to silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that felt staged, as if everyone downstairs was rehearsing lines for a play they'd cast me in without my permission. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, letting the weight of everything sink in. The betrayal. The manipulation. The fact that I'd walked into this house as a daughter and realized I was being treated like a bank account with legs. I got dressed without speaking to anyone and went downstairs. My mother was already seated at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. "We're having lunch with Bernard today," she said, not even looking up. "He's the family lawyer. He'll help explain things better." "Explain what?" I asked flatly. "How to use my inheritance without my consent." She finally looked up, eyes narrowing. "No one's trying to steal from you, Madison. We're just trying to survive. Your father's company is in trouble. Eric's been working day and night." I didn't ask about Eric. Her lips tightened. "Your grandfather wouldn't want this family to fall apart." I nearly laughed. "He wanted me to stay far away from this family's business. He made that crystal clear." She didn't answer. Just folded her hands like we were negotiating a charity deal. By noon, I was sitting across from Bernard, the man who once gave me a box of chocolates every Christmas, now wearing a pinstripe suit that smelled like cologne and corruption. The office hadn't changed. Leather chairs. Oil paintings of dead men who probably made their money the same way my family had, off the backs of others. "Madison," he said warmly. "You've grown into quite the young woman. London looks good on you. Save the flattery. Let's talk numbers." He chuckled, clearly not expecting the edge in my voice. "All right then. Let's cut to it. Your grandfather's trust is structured around your 30th birthday. Once that date hits, all funds and assets transfer into your name. However, you have the legal right to allocate those funds into any investment you choose." "You mean like Walker Holdings?" I interrupted. He gave a thin smile. "It would be a smart move. Your family's company needs a short-term boost, but the projections are solid. You'd not only be helping them recover, you'd likely see high returns. And who'd control those investments? Well, he said carefully, your father and Eric are already board executives. It makes sense for them to. So I give them $8 million and in return I get, what? Their word. Your seat on the board, he said like that was some grand honor. Understood. This meeting is over. Madison, Bernard warned, his tone cooling. Refusing to engage now could strain more than just family ties. Turned back. I didn't come here to keep the peace. I came because someone faked a heart attack and lied to my face. If I can't trust you to tell the truth, I sure as hell won't trust you with my money. Back at the house, Savannah knocked on my door that evening. Her eyes were swollen, mascara smudged. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I overheard them, she whispered. Dad and Bernard. They're trying to have you declared unfit to manage the trust. I blinked. What? They talked about hiring a psychologist. Filing a private motion in probate court. Saying you've been under stress, not mentally stable since Grandpa passed. I felt something cold and electric shoot down my spine. They're going to try and take legal control. She nodded. I didn't know it would go this far, Madison. I swear. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, fury and fear colliding in my chest. They're trying to steal it outright. She hesitated, then added, I heard one more thing. They've already created fake loan contracts under your name. One of them is with an offshore company. My breath stopped. They forged my signature. I think so. Madison. I don't know what to do. Understood. I do. That night, I reached out to the one person I still trusted. Julian. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since we ended things on good but painful terms. He was a financial crimes investigator now. Still sharp, still principled. Still the only person I knew who wouldn't look at me as a paycheck or a pawn. I sent a short message. I need help. It's about investment fraud and forged documents. It's urgent. He replied within minutes. Where are you? We met the next afternoon at a quiet cafe outside Stamford, far from family eyes. When I walked in, he stood up immediately. Still tall. Still steady. Still him. Tell me everything, he said. And I did. Call. The fake hospital trip. The dinner table like a stage. The manipulation. The threats. The documents Savannah overheard. And the fact that I was certain my inheritance was about to be stolen through fraud. He didn't blink once. Just listened. Do you have evidence? He asked when I finished. Not yet. But Savannah has access to their internal system. She's willing to help me download everything. He nodded slowly. If they forged your signature and used your identity to secure offshore loans, this isn't just fraud. This is federal. I swallowed hard. So what do we do? Julian leaned forward. We get the evidence. Then we burn their empire to the ground. That night, Savannah snuck into my room with her laptop. She looked terrified. You sure you want to do this? She whispered. He nodded. It's now or never. She logged into the Walker Holdings network. Dozens of files loaded. We didn't have time to be delicate. I searched through financial records, project logs, board meeting transcripts. And then I found it. A folder labeled Archangel Funding. Click. Inside was a contract, an offshore loan from the Bahamas. $2 million borrowed at 18% interest. Signed by Madison Blake. Name. My passport. My forged signature. Gasp. This is it. Savannah covered her mouth. You didn't sign that. Of course not. Copied everything. Every spreadsheet. Every contract. Every irregular payment. Then I encrypted it and sent it to Julian with a note. Go. When I shut the laptop, I looked at Savannah. Thank you, I said softly. You just saved me. She shook her head. No, you saved me. I just didn't realize it until now. I barely slept that night. Because now, I wasn't just the daughter they underestimated. I was the enemy they never saw coming. I left the house before dawn, the fog curling through the maple-lined streets like whispers of the past trying to pull me back. I didn't wait for breakfast. Didn't wait for anyone to realize I was gone. The files were already with Julian, but there was one more name I needed to see before this battle truly began. Joseph Reed, Grandpa's old estate attorney. He was the one who'd structured the trust, the only man alive who knew exactly what Grandpa had protected me from. If anyone could validate the documents and fight back against whatever Bernard was planning, it was Joseph. His office was in a restored brick building in New Haven's historic quarter. When I stepped inside, the air smelled like old wood and coffee. He looked up from a file, silver-haired, spectacles resting on the bridge of his nose, and stood slowly. "Madison Blake," he said. "I was wondering how long it would take before you showed up." "You knew?" "Yes." He nodded gravely. "Your grandfather warned me. He said the day would come when they'd try to force your hand. That's why he had me draft protections." I reached into my bag and handed him the flash drive. "They already forged my signature. Offshore loans. They've tried everything short of drugging me." He plugged in the drive, eyes narrowing as he scanned the contents. Minutes passed. Then he pulled out a thick folder from his drawer and placed it on the table. "This," he said, "is the original petition your grandfather had me prepare in case of trust violations. If you sign this, I'll submit it to probate court and request an immediate freeze on asset movement, along with a formal investigation." I stared at the papers, heart pounding. "And what happens after?" Joseph looked me straight in the eye. "The courts will decide whether the family can be trusted. But with this much evidence, and with Julian backing the financial fraud investigation, it won't just be a civil matter. It'll go federal." I signed the papers. It felt like signing a goodbye letter to the version of family I had once begged to believe in. 2 days later it began. Julian called early in the morning. "It's happening," he said. "The Securities and Exchange Commission is filing a request to freeze all Walker Holdings accounts. The FBI has already issued a search warrant for suspected document forgery and financial abuse of trust assets. And Connecticut's Attorney General is opening an investigation into Bernard's firm." I stood at the upstairs window, looking out at my parents' garden below. My mother was trimming the hydrangeas. My father was speaking on his phone near the hedges. Composed. Clueless that justice was already en route. At 9:06 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway. The agents moved like shadows, suits pressed, badges visible. The lead one, a tall, no-nonsense man with a scar across his brow, walked straight up to the front door. "Douglas Blake," he said, holding up a document. "I'm Agent Montgomery with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant to search this property in connection to allegations of investment fraud and misuse of inheritance trust funds." My father froze. My mother dropped her shears. Eric, who had just stepped out of his car, looked like he'd seen a ghost. And I walked downstairs calmly, like I'd just come to get a glass of water. "What's going on?" my father demanded. "You tell me," I said, my tone flat. "But maybe start with the forged documents and the offshore transfers." He turned to the agents. "She's manipulating this. She's turning on her own family." "No," I said firmly. "You did that when you lied to me. When you used my name to sign illegal contracts." My mother's face crumbled. "Please, Madison. We can fix this. We can sit down." I turned to her, my voice barely a whisper. "You sat down with a lawyer and tried to have me declared mentally unstable. I don't think there's anything left to fix." The search took hours. Computers, drives, physical ledgers. The look in my father's eyes was no longer confident. It was cornered. That kind of panic a man feels when he realizes the kingdom he built was made of ash and paper. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled. The SEC issued a formal freeze on Walker Holdings assets. Every account linked to the company or Bernard's legal firm was sealed. Julian, with help from Joseph Reed, presented a full package to state investigators that exposed years of backdoor deals, fake consulting agreements, and massive shell company laundering. I stayed quiet as the press caught wind. Headlines exploded. Prominent developer family under investigation for fraud. Heir blows whistle on $8 million estate conspiracy. But I didn't care about the attention. I only cared about the victims. Because it turned out this wasn't just about me. Over 40 families had invested in Walker Holdings projects. Some put in retirement savings. Others had taken loans. Most hadn't seen a single return. And all of them had been fed lies just like me. In Fairfield District Court, the case was filed under a civil and criminal fraud petition. I walked into the courthouse wearing the same blazer I'd worn to my first job interview in London. A quiet nod to where I'd come from, and how far I'd risen. My father sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. My mother sat beside him, pale, lips trembling. Eric slouched, trying not to meet my eyes. Bernard, their once trusted attorney, looked like a man with a noose around his career. The prosecutor laid it all out. Forged contracts, misappropriated funds, investor deception, and a coordinated attempt to override the will of a deceased man. When the fake contract bearing my name and signature was displayed on the screen, I heard a few gasps. And then the real bombshell dropped. Julian took the stand and revealed a voice recording. My father and Bernard discussing how to handle me if I refused to cooperate. "We pushed the mental angle," my father's voice said, clear and cold. "She's always been erratic. All it takes is one psychologist." The courtroom went dead quiet. Even the judge leaned forward. When my mother was asked about the plan, she cried. Actual tears this time. And I didn't know whether to believe them. Bernard cracked under pressure and took a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided everything: emails, records, signed deals. His testimony buried my father and Eric. The trial lasted 5 weeks. In the end, the judge delivered a sentence that shook the room. 15 years in federal prison for Douglas Blake. No parole. Eric got 12. My mother received a 5-year suspended sentence, but the public disgrace would follow her far longer than any probation. I didn't feel victorious. Felt clean. Like I'd finally rinsed off the lies that had been stuck to my skin since childhood. Outside the courthouse, I was approached by an elderly couple who had invested everything they had in one of Walker's failed developments. The wife hugged me. "You didn't just save the money," she whispered. "You saved the truth." I nodded, eyes stinging. Because in that moment, I realized the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been manipulated by someone they loved. In the aftermath of the trial, the world around me felt quieter, but not in the peaceful way. It was the quiet of fallout. A silence that hummed under the surface of everything, like the air before a thunderstorm. I spent the first week avoiding the media entirely. They camped outside the family estate, outside the courthouse, even tried to call old colleagues from London. But I wasn't interested in becoming a headline. I had already lived the story. I didn't need to read it, too. Instead, I met with Joseph Reed and Julian to set up something Grandpa would have wanted. A victim support fund using the portion of my inheritance that had remained untouched. We called it the Community Restitution Fund. 60% of what was left, over $5 million, was set aside for those who had lost their savings investing in Walker Holdings. Joseph structured it legally, and Julian ensured that it couldn't be touched by anyone else, not even me without oversight. I didn't want power. I wanted protection. For them, for myself, and for the truth. By midwinter, we had processed over 100 claims. Some came from small-time contractors who were never paid for drywall and plumbing work. Others were retired couples who trusted the Blake name and put their pensions into the Medawine Estates development. A few came from young families who'd put down payments on homes that never broke ground. One day, I received a letter from a woman named Claire Dupree. She'd invested $200,000 into a housing project that Eric had spearheaded, and when it failed, she lost everything. Her husband left. Her son had to drop out of college. she wrote. I prayed every night for someone to make this right. Then I read about what you did. You made the lies stop. Thank you. That letter shook something in me. I wasn't just cleaning up my family's mess anymore. I was laying bricks for something better. In early spring, I officially dissolved what was left of Walker Holdings and transferred its remaining assets, buildings, land deeds, and architectural plans, into a newly formed nonprofit, the Harper Foundation for Ethical Development. It was more than symbolic. It was reclamation. The skyscraper in downtown Stamford, once a glossy tribute to my father's greed, was converted into a shared workspace for small businesses, startups, and community organizations. The penthouse, turned into a vocational education center for youth from underserved neighborhoods. And the name on the building's front. No longer Walker Holdings. Just Harper. No first names. No titles. Just a quiet tribute to the one man in this family who believed in integrity more than image. Grandpa. I kept one thing in that building from the old days. His framed photo, the one where he's standing by his Vermont porch, holding a mug, smiling into the morning sun. I put it by the main window of the foundation's office. Right beside it, I placed the envelope he'd once given me, the letter that changed everything. Blood is not a chain. Integrity is what you must hold on to. Savannah joined me a few weeks later. She had moved out of the family home and taken a communications job with the foundation. To everyone's surprise, including mine, she was good at it. Really good. She gave speeches, spoke at town halls, wrote newsletters with phrases like, "We build back better when we build with truth." When I watched her on stage, I saw a different Savannah, less afraid, more steady. She still carried her guilt, I could see it in her eyes, but she wore it like someone learning to live with the past, not someone still hiding from it. I was proud of her, even if neither of us said it aloud. One day, she walked into my office holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. Her eyes were glassy. "This came for you," she said. "No return address." I took it, peeled back the paper, and inside was a folded piece of old sketch paper. My wedding dress design. The very first one I ever drew at 17. It had soft pencil lines, faded a bit, but the detail, the stitching, the draping, the satin illusion neckline, I remembered every line like it lived in my bones. Attached to it was a small card, written in my mother's handwriting. "This belongs to you. Keep creating something beautiful." I stared at it for a long time, heart caught somewhere between ache and awe. We hadn't spoken since the sentencing. She was serving her suspended sentence in a small town in Maine, quietly, away from the press, away from everything. I didn't know who she'd asked to send this to me. Maybe Joseph, maybe Savannah, but I knew it meant something. Maybe not forgiveness, but a fragment of understanding. That night, I walked to the rooftop of the foundation's new headquarters. The city lights below twinkled like stars that had fallen and decided to stay. Savannah joined me, holding 2 steaming cups of cocoa like she used to when we were kids sneaking out onto the porch. "Do you think he regrets it?" she asked after a long pause. "Dad, I mean." I sipped quietly. "I think, if he does, it's too late to matter." She nodded, not sad, just accepting. "Do you think we'll always carry this?" Thought about that. About courtrooms and forged contracts. About fashion sketches hidden in tin boxes and long drives through Vermont. About betrayal and rage and ultimately choice. "Yes," I said. "But maybe not as wounds. Maybe as reminders." We stood in silence, letting the wind pull our hair around our faces like whispers from a past that was finally learning to let go. The next day, I was invited to speak at a university seminar on ethical leadership. I almost declined. Then I thought about that girl in the courtroom gallery, the one who had watched me like I was proof that telling the truth didn't have to ruin you. I went. And when I spoke, I didn't start with my family's scandal. I started with a sentence that lived in me like marrow. Sometimes, doing what's right means being the first one to say no, even if it means standing alone. After the seminar, a girl came up to me. She was no older than 20. Nervous but determined. My uncle's trying to get me to sign over my trust, she whispered. He says family should always help family. But I don't trust him. And your story? It helped me see I don't have to be afraid to protect what's mine. I squeezed her hand. You don't owe anyone your silence. As I walked out of that auditorium, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. My story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming identity, turning betrayal into boundary, and using what broke me to build something unbreakable. The spring thaw came earlier than expected, as if even nature was eager to wash the past away. By April, the Harper Foundation had helped over 120 victims of Walker Holdings recover parts of their lost investments. Our team had grown from a small cluster of volunteers to a full-time staff of 16. Lawyers, financial advisors, social workers, and community organizers. Me. The woman everyone once dismissed as the dramatic daughter with the fashion dream. Now they called me executive director. But titles never mattered to me. What mattered was the work. And the people. Every week, I spent one afternoon in Bridgeport at the first relocation complex we funded. It used to be a half-finished luxury apartment project my father abandoned when the investors pulled out. We turned it into affordable housing for families displaced by real estate scams. Many of them Walker's own victims. The kids there called me Model Madison. They thought it was hilarious I used to design dresses for London Fashion Week. I let them draw on the whiteboard in my office, plan their imaginary cities. One girl, Carmen, wanted to build a library that only opened at night, for people with loud hearts who can't sleep. Another boy, Elijah, wanted a bridge that glowed blue whenever someone felt lonely. They reminded me of who I was before my family tried to own me. Before money became a weapon. Before loyalty became a trap. That's why I kept writing. Not just grant proposals or reports but essays. Journal entries. Reflections. About betrayal. About courage. About why integrity isn't the absence of mistakes, but the refusal to stay quiet about them. My essays started getting attention. Forbes published one titled, When Blood Becomes a Battle, How I Took My Name Back. The Harvard Ethics Review published another, Inheritance, Identity, and the Cost of Silence. Vogue even reached out for a feature. Not because of fashion but because, as the editor said, you redefined what elegance means. From fabric to social responsibility. I never expected to become the face of ethical reform. But in a way it made sense. I had walked through fire, lit by the people who were supposed to shelter me, and came out with scars that taught me to design not just clothes, but better systems. Still, there were days the weight caught up to me. Like the day I received a certified letter from the Connecticut Department of Corrections. My mother had been transferred to the Women's Correctional Facility in York to begin serving her 18-month sentence. She'd finally accepted responsibility for helping conceal offshore funds after the trial. At first I didn't respond. Then I remembered the sketch. The one she returned to me. The first wedding dress I ever drew. The one I thought she'd thrown away the day I left for design school. It had arrived in a plain package with nothing but the words, "This belongs to you. Keep creating something beautiful." I decided to visit. The correctional facility was quieter than I expected. No steel bars or flickering bulbs like in movies. Just a cold lobby. Plastic chairs. Walls painted a sad shade of beige. She entered in a light blue uniform, her hair tied back, her face paler but composed. She stopped when she saw me, something unreadable flashing in her eyes. "Madison," she said, almost like a sigh. He nodded. "I got your sketch." She smiled faintly. "I didn't know you still cared about it." "I didn't," I said truthfully. "Not until I saw you still did." We sat across from each other. The silence stretched like a bridge between distant shores. "I almost threw it out," she admitted. "But then I thought, maybe someday you'd want to remember who you were before I tried to change you." That hit deeper than she knew. 4 years I'd blamed her most of all. Not for what she did, but for what she allowed. For letting Dad and Eric treat me like a problem instead of a person. For brushing my hair with one hand while rewriting my future with the other. For knowing and choosing silence. I always thought keeping the family together meant keeping secrets, she said quietly. But all it did was make the rot grow faster. I nodded slowly. You don't have to explain everything. I'm not here to punish you. Then why are you here? I looked her in the eye. To see if there's anything left to salvage. She didn't answer for a long time. Then finally. Maybe just one thing. The truth. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. After the visit, I returned to Vermont. To the old house Grandpa left me. The one where he spent his last years sketching property maps and watching deer wander through the woods. I had converted it into a shelter for women leaving abusive financial situations. But for one day, on my 33rd birthday, I was just Madison. No lawsuits, no board meetings. Just a granddaughter lighting a candle on a frosty porch and whispering to the wind. I did it, Grandpa. The trees didn't answer, but I felt something. Back in New York, invitations poured in. One stood out. The Berlin International Ethics Conference wanted me to speak. They titled the keynote, Courage in the Face of Blood Ties. First I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker. I didn't want to air my story like a soap opera. But then I remembered the teenage girl who once emailed me after the trial saying, because of you, I refused to sign over my inheritance to my uncle. I didn't know I was allowed to say no. And I said yes. The night before the speech, I barely slept. But standing on that stage, in a room full of suits and policymakers, I opened with no slides, no jargon. Just a sentence that had carried me through every moment of doubt. Sometimes you have to choose between protecting your family's reputation or protecting your own soul. I told them everything. The midnight call. The fake heart attack. The forged signature. The courtrooms. The cost of standing alone. I didn't do it to shame my family. I did it because silence destroys more than truth ever will. Afterward, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. She ran a non-profit in Eastern Europe for victims of financial coercion within families. You spoke the words I've never been brave enough to say, she told me. Your story doesn't just matter. It saves. And right then I knew. I wasn't just healing. I was helping others do the same. I used to think justice came like thunder. Loud, sudden, unmistakable. But as I watched the months stretch on, I realized something deeper. True justice comes slowly, in the quiet decisions we make day after day. In refusing to look away. In choosing to speak up, even when our voice trembles. That summer, we launched the Bridge Forward program, an initiative through the Harper Foundation focused on rebuilding abandoned construction sites into schools, women's shelters, and startup incubators. One of those sites was a hollowed-out concrete shell in Norwalk, once meant to be a luxury condo tower called Skyrise Fairfield, a project my brother Eric had personally championed. It now housed a thriving learning center for single mothers finishing their GEDs. When I walked into the lobby for the grand opening, I paused in front of the polished wall near the entrance. The donors had insisted my name be placed above the door, but I declined. Instead, the plaque read, "This space is dedicated to everyone who chose truth over comfort." And that's when I saw her, Savannah, standing at the front of the crowd, holding a microphone, her voice clear and resonant. And we know that not every story ends in reconciliation. But every story deserves restoration. We can't rewrite what was done, but we can build what comes next. The audience erupted in applause. I watched her eyes scan the room until they landed on me. For the first time in years, I saw no fear in her, only pride. We had come a long way since that cold November morning when she helped lure me home with a fake emergency. Very long way. A few weeks later, the Harper Foundation was invited to a televised panel on CNBC about innovative restitution in modern economies. They called us a case study in post-fraud recovery. They didn't ask about the scandal. They asked about the model we'd built. And for once, my family's name wasn't attached to disgrace, but to healing. But no matter how far I ran, the past had its ways of circling back. That September, I received a handwritten letter from a correctional facility in upstate New York. It was from Eric, the same brother who once tried to coerce me into signing over my inheritance, and later forged my signature on offshore loan contracts. The envelope was plain, no return address, inside one page. His handwriting, still jagged and hurried, read, "I still think you betrayed us. But I also know I wouldn't be here if I hadn't betrayed myself first. You were never the enemy. You were just the mirror. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope one day you'll understand why I tried so hard to hold on to what was already gone." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not because I planned to reply, but because even monsters were made. Often by fear, by power, by greed, by family. And sometimes the only thing more painful than facing them is realizing they were once your reflection. I didn't forgive Eric that day. But I let go of the hatred. That same month, the New York Times ran a Sunday feature on women who reclaimed their legacy. I was one of them. The photo showed me in front of the new Harper Foundation headquarters, now housed in what used to be my father's central Stamford office. Behind me, construction blueprints covered the walls. Only now, they weren't luxury condos or retail malls. They were housing cooperatives, shelters, clinics, places for people who had been forgotten. A journalist asked, "Do you feel like you've won?" Thought about it. About the courtroom silence when the judge read my father's sentence. About the letter from the elderly woman who said, "You saved my family." About Savannah's voice shaking as she made her first public apology. And about the moment I found my old wedding dress sketch in the mail, sent by a mother who never said, "I'm sorry," but finally found another way to say, "I remember who you are." So I answered, I didn't win. Chose. Over and over again. I chose not to let betrayal define me. And that's a choice I'll keep making. But not everyone saw it that way. Some people still whispered. She turned on her family. She destroyed them to look good. She could have handled it quietly. Those people didn't know what it meant to wake up in the middle of the night fearing your name had been signed onto a crime. They didn't know what it was like to see your childhood bedroom turned into a legal war room. They didn't understand the cost of silence. Or the danger of legacy used as a leash. But I didn't need them to understand. 'Cause I knew. And because somewhere, a girl like me was staring down her own broken empire, wondering if she had the right to say no. And I wanted her to hear, "You do." As the year closed, we finished our third community build. A startup incubator for young women of color in New Haven. On opening day, I stood before the ribbon, scissors in hand, and invited a young girl named Jada to cut it with me. She had just pitched her own clothing line, a blend of streetwear and eco-conscious design, and won the foundation's first seed grant. "I want to change the world," she said. Smiled. "You already have." That night, I walked alone through the halls of our headquarters. Past the blueprint rooms. Past the team huddled around late-night coffee. Past the framed photos of every community we helped rebuild. And I paused at the final hallway, where a single spotlight shone on one framed item. The letter from Grandpa Calvin. "You're the only one in our bloodline brave enough to say no." I ran my fingers along the frame, a quiet ache settling into my chest. Not pain but memory. I was no longer the daughter they wanted. I was the woman they never saw coming. And tomorrow I'd keep building, brick by brick, block by block. Not just communities but courage. Because truth has a sound. And once it finds its voice, it never goes quiet again. On a windswept October morning, I stood on the rooftop of the Harper Foundation's flagship center as workers installed the final row of solar panels. Below, laughter floated up from the courtyard where families gathered for a community wellness event, our largest one yet. Savannah joined me with 2 cups of cocoa, her hair pulled back, face flushed from the crisp air. "Do you think Dad ever regretted it?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes heavy. I looked out at the cityscape, the towering buildings, the roads that led both back to our past and forward into something entirely new. "I don't know," I said after a long pause. "Maybe. But if he did, it came too late for it to matter." Savannah nodded. "Yeah. I think you're right. We stood there together, not as the sisters we once were, but as the women we had become. Separate, stronger, scarred but not broken. She had stepped out of the shadow of our family's manipulation, and so had I. None of us are born knowing how to choose right over comfort. We learn. And sometimes we learn the hardest way possible. In the months that followed, we expanded the Bridge Forward program to 4 additional states. My essays were now included in courses at Yale, Columbia, and even Parsons, my old design school. I received letters every week from people I'd never met, thanking me for sharing the story they'd always been too ashamed to tell. And one letter stood out. It was from a 17-year-old girl in Chicago. She wrote, "My uncle tried to get me to sign away my part of my mom's life insurance policy. But I remembered your story. I told him no. And I told him why. Because Madison did it too." That one sentence, "because Madison did it too," stayed with me longer than all the court documents, headlines, or applause. Because it reminded me this was never just about a family scandal. It was about a blueprint, path, a mirror for anyone lost in the chaos of betrayal, wondering if they were crazy for trusting their gut. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who finally stopped doubting her own voice. And that voice continued to grow. I was invited to speak at the International Summit for Financial Justice in Geneva. There, surrounded by policymakers, economists, and journalists, I shared the story. Not to shame my family, but to spark a conversation about how wealth, when weaponized by those closest to us, becomes a silent epidemic. I ended my speech with a truth I had learned the hard way. Blood is not a contract. And silence is not peace. Afterwards, a middle-aged man approached me, his eyes brimming. He was a CEO who'd once been embezzled by his own son. "You reminded me that doing the right thing doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free." Back home, I visited the Vermont house where it all began, where Grandpa Calvin once told me that integrity was the only inheritance that mattered. The shelter now housed 15 women and their children. One of them, a woman named Mira, had escaped an abusive marriage where her husband used financial control to silence her. She showed me a drawing her daughter had made of a magic house where moms become strong again. And I cried. Not for what was lost, but for what was finally possible. Later that night, I lit a candle on the porch and watched the stars come out, their light steady and quiet. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "And I kept your promise." The next morning, I returned to the city for a very different event. The official unveiling of the Harper Foundation for Ethical Development's new headquarters, repurposed from one of Walker Holdings' most notorious abandoned projects. The press called it a full-circle moment. Called it justice reimagined. Julian stood beside me, smiling. He had become more than just an ally. He was now one of our board's key advisors, helping us navigate state partnerships and compliance as we grew. "You're changing the blueprint," he told me as I stood with scissors in hand, ready to cut the ceremonial ribbon. "Not just for buildings, for people." Smiled. That was the plan all along. When the ribbon fell, cheers erupted. Not from CEOs or politicians, but from teachers, contractors, single moms, retired investors, and kids who now had a place to dream safely. And in that moment I finally understood the power of choosing yourself, even when the cost is everything you thought you had. Later, I visited the Women's Correctional Facility in York one last time. My mother had requested to see me before she was transferred to a supervised release program in Maine. We sat in the same plastic chairs beneath that dim yellow light. "I read your speech," she said quietly. "The one in Geneva. I figured you might." She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "I don't expect us to go back. But I want to thank you. For not letting me silence you. For not letting him destroy you." I nodded, my throat thick with unshed tears. "I don't know if I forgive you yet. But I don't hate you either." She nodded, and for the first time in decades, I saw her as not just my mother, but as a woman shaped by a world that told her power was something you had to steal to keep. She'd lost a lot. So had I. But we were both still here. Still choosing. And in the end, that's what healing looks like. Not perfection. But honesty. Not revenge. but restoration. Not forgetting, but remembering with grace. On the first anniversary of the Harper Foundation, we launched the Legacy Reinvented initiative, a national campaign encouraging families to review, rethink, and rewrite their estate plans with ethics, equity, and responsibility in mind. It became one of our most powerful movements. Because the truth is, families break when secrets grow louder than love. And rebuilding starts when anyone decides enough is enough. Madison Harper did. And if you're listening to this, maybe you can too. Because when your story gets hijacked by people who only love you when you obey, your first act of freedom is this. Tell it anyway. Loud. With your full name. And without apology. Madison's story is a powerful reminder that blood cannot justify betrayal. When faced with deception from those she once trusted most, she chose what was right, even at great personal cost. In a world full of compromise, she reminds us that integrity never goes out of style. Standing up, saying no to wrongdoing, that's not just courage. It's how we reclaim our worth. And sometimes standing alone is the only way not to fall. What would you do in Madison's shoes? Would you have the courage to say no? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge.